In a crowded shelter full of barking dogs, one puppy sat silently, his eyes brimming with tears. Everyone passed him by, until one man stopped. What followed wasn't just adoption. It was a journey that shocked the shelter staff, touched a community, and revealed a secret no one could have imagined. The shelter echoed with noise, dogs barking for attention, tails thumping against metal cages, volunteers moving quickly to match eager families with pets. But in the middle of the commotion sat one quiet cage. Inside, a small German shepherd mix huddled in the corner, his head low and his eyes shimmering with tears. Unlike the others, he didn't bark or wag his tail when people walked by. He simply stared, as if hope had already slipped away. Visitors glanced at him but quickly turned to livelier dogs. "Too sad," someone muttered, moving on. The puppy's ears drooped, lower with each missed chance, yet behind those tear-streaked eyes was a story untold, one waiting for someone, willing to look past the sadness and see the heart still beating beneath. That afternoon, a man named Daniel walked through the shelter doors. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd come, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a quiet longing he couldn't name. Rows of wagging tails greeted him, dogs pressing their noses against the bars, begging for attention. Volunteers smiled, guiding him from kennel to kennel, but Daniel's steps slowed when he reached the quiet cage at the end of the row. Inside sat the small German shepherd pup, motionless, his fur slightly matted, his eyes swollen from silent crying. Unlike the others, he didn't leap or bark. Instead, he simply lifted one trembling paw and pressed it against the bars. Daniel crouched, his heart tightening at the sight. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, reaching out. The pup's tear-filled eyes locked with his, and for a brief moment, the room around them seemed to disappear as a volunteer noticed his interest and sighed. "That one's had a rough time," she said softly. "He was abandoned young. He doesn't trust easily. Most people don't even stop to look at him." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He just stayed there, his hand resting gently against the bars, feeling an invisible bond forming in the silence between them. Daniel sat back on his heels, still staring at the trembling pup. It explained the sadness in the little dog's eyes, yet something about that broken spirit stirred something deep inside him. He knew pain, and he recognized it in the puppy. The staff suggested a few easier choices, pups that were already social and eager. But Daniel's gaze kept returning to the quiet cage. The pup hadn't moved, except to keep one paw pressed against the bars, as if begging someone, anyone, not to give up on him. The volunteer hesitated when Daniel finally spoke. "I want this one." She blinked, surprised. "Are you sure? He'll be a challenge. He doesn't trust people easily, and he might take a long time to come around." Daniel nodded firmly, his voice steady. "Then I'll give him the time. Nobody deserves to be left behind." The paperwork was signed, and as the door to the cage swung open, the little pup hesitated. But for the first time in days, his eyes followed someone with a faint flicker of hope. The ride home was quiet. The puppy sat curled in the corner of the car's seat, refusing to meet Daniel's eyes. Every bump in the road made him flinch, his tiny body pressed tightly against the door as though bracing for the worst. Daniel spoke gently the entire way, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now, buddy. No one's going to hurt you." At home, the pup hesitated at the doorway, sniffing cautiously before stepping inside. He patted softly across the floor, tail tucked firmly between his legs. Food and water waited in bowls, but he ignored them, choosing instead to hide beneath the table. Daniel left the bowls untouched, sitting nearby, without forcing him. The first night was the hardest. The pup whimpered endlessly, curling into himself, too afraid to sleep. Daniel lay on the floor with a blanket, speaking softly until exhaustion finally carried the puppy into restless dreams. Every small gesture showed the depth of his fear. But Daniel saw something else too, a faint spark of longing, a desire to trust, buried beneath layers of sadness. And he knew that spark was worth fighting for. Daniel never rushed the puppy, never forced him from his hiding spots. He simply stayed close, speaking in calm tones, leaving treats near the pup's paws, and waiting. Then, one quiet evening, the first breakthrough came. The puppy stepped cautiously from beneath the table and sniffed at Daniel's hand. His tail remained tucked, but for the first time, he didn't retreat. Instead, he licked Daniel's fingers once, a hesitant gesture of trust. Daniel's chest tightened with relief. That's it, buddy. You're safe. A few days later, another miracle. Daniel returned from work to find the puppy waiting at the door, his tail wagging. Just once, but enough to bring tears to Daniel's eyes. That night, the pup barked softly while chasing a toy for the very first time by the end of the week. He curled up on the couch beside Daniel, falling into the deepest sleep he'd had since leaving the shelter. His tiny body rose and fell with steady breaths, finally free of fear. For Daniel, each moment was small. But together, they told a story of healing. One tail wag, one bark, one heartbeat at a time. One afternoon, Daniel took the puppy, now named Shadow, for a walk through the quiet park. The little dog trotted at his side, ears perked, tail wagging faintly. For the first time, Shadow seemed curious about the world. But then something unexpected happened. A jogger passed by, carrying a whistle clipped to his bag. When it jingled, Shadow froze. His body stiffened, ears flat, eyes wide with fear. Then, without warning, he dropped into a crouch and barked in a sharp, deliberate rhythm. 3 quick bursts followed by a pause. Daniel blinked in surprise. It wasn't random. It was a command response. Back at home, he tested gently, clapping twice. Shadow sat instantly, as if trained. Another sound, a whistle Daniel bought later, sent Shadow darting to the door and pressing his nose to the handle. The truth dawned on him. This wasn't just a sad, abandoned puppy. Shadow had once been trained, perhaps even part of a working program. But for reasons unknown, he had been discarded, left broken and alone. Daniel's chest tightened. The shelter had seen him as hopeless. But now, he realized, Shadow wasn't hopeless at all. He was extraordinary, and his story had only just begun. From that day forward, Shadow's transformation accelerated. With Daniel's patience and love, the once trembling, tearful puppy blossomed into a confident companion. He no longer hid beneath tables or flinched at sudden sounds. Instead, he greeted each morning with excited barks, eager for walks and play. Daniel saw the spark in Shadow's eyes return, a joy that had been buried under fear. The pup raced across the yard, chasing balls and leaping into Daniel's arms, tail wagging furiously. At night, instead of whimpering alone, he curled close against Daniel's side, breathing peacefully, finally trusting that he was safe. But healing wasn't one-sided. Shadow's resilience softened Daniel's own scars, teaching him the power of second chances. Together, man and dog had rebuilt not just trust, but a bond stronger than either had known before. Shadow was no longer the saddest puppy. He was home. Months later, Daniel often returned to the shelter, this time not as a visitor, but as a proud adopter with Shadow by his side. Staff who had once pitied the little pup were astonished at his transformation. The sad, silent dog they remembered now wagged his tail proudly, eyes bright and full of life. Children in the shelter reached out to pet him, and Shadow leaned into their touch, no longer afraid. His story spread through the community, inspiring others to choose the overlooked, the broken, and the forgotten. Daniel often said it best. I thought I was saving him, but the truth is, he saved me. Shadow's journey was proof that love can heal the deepest wounds. And to you watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the saddest beginnings lead to the most beautiful stories.